Hi everybody, how you doing? Welcome again to another Ask Professor Paranormal. It's been a couple of weeks and we are back. Before I get started here, I'll just mention that the next one will be happening in 2 weeks, but we will be skipping 1 week in May because the second session in May would fall on Memorial Day weekend, so we're going to skip that. So it's going to be May 11th. And then we're going to go to June 1st, and it'll be every other week after that. So just want to let you know. Hi, folks. It's good to see some friendly, familiar names, and I'd say faces if I knew, but some of you I know your faces, so that's kind of cool. Of course, as always, I'm here to answer questions or just simply talk about topics or my experiences, things like that. And it goes the realm of the paranormal completely. But many of you know that I can also talk about intelligently about chocolate and a few other topics as well. Okay, first I'm going to start out by what I normally do is talk about the classes for the Rhine Education Center. And we have a few classes starting up. Actually, the first one that's starting for this session will be starting this Thursday. And it's my course. It's a 4-week class, although we're going to be skipping 1 week in May. And it is called Developing Investigative Techniques. And it really is a history class on how things have changed over time when doing investigations, not just of apparitions, hauntings, and poltergeists, but also in investigating people's experiences outside the laboratory of extrasensory perception, psychokinesis, and related phenomena and experience and abilities. Starting with kind of the history going back even as far as a couple thousand years ago with Arthemedorus, who is it's the first recorded ghost hunt, you might say, on record. And then there's also the first recorded remote viewing experiment that was conducted many hundreds and hundreds of years ago in ancient Greece. But we're kind of bringing it up to date and talking about how the process of investigation of various phenomena called paranormal has changed over time to where we are today. So that is a 4-week class starting on Thursday. It runs the entire month of May with one exception being May 15th. And then the other class I'm teaching is called A Scientific Approach to ESP, looking at essentially how we deal with people's experiences of and how we test things in the laboratory of extrasensory perception, which includes telepathy, clairvoyance, which is a kind of a catch-all for any real-time psychic ability. And then we also have, of course, remote viewing falls into that. Precognition is part of that as well. We have a couple of the areas that we cover, and I'm going to talk in that class about very specific research trends that have been replicated, that have done what all the scientists who are skeptical say we don't do, which is repeat experiments that have positive results. So kind of arming people with an understanding of how ESP might work, some variables that affect us being psychic. That's an 8-week class starting on Tuesday, May 6th. So I'll be starting that one. And then on Monday nights, starting May 5th, is our Introduction to Parapsychology class, which is a survey of the field. And that's being taught by Jimmy Akin, who runs his own podcast called Jimmy Akin's Mysterious Universe. And it's a great podcast. And Jimmy's been really good as an instructor for us. And finally, we have a 4-week class that is going on Wednesday nights called Psi Themes in Music, kind of looking at the history and connections of the paranormal and psychic experiences with musical development and creation and performing and such. So kind of a good range of courses. That's through the Rhine Education Center, which is just rhineedu.org. I think that we've had the link up. The link is in the information for the class, for the channel as well. But also, I should mention that, and I'll get to your question in a moment, Lucas, but also I want to mention that the Rhine Research Center does have a YouTube channel with several different playlists, and we'll have the link coming up here in the chat in a moment. There we go. the Rhine Research Center's channel has some lectures, including recent lectures celebrating the 90th anniversary of the founding of the Duke Parapsychology Laboratory, which over time became the Rhine Research Center. And the channel if you go to playlists, when you go to the channel, you'll actually see a few that are Rhine at 90. We're going to be adding one a month through the anniversary process this fall. I did a discussion about kind of my connection and John Kruth, the executive director's connection in the history of the Rhine. Mitch Horowitz, who's a well-known writer on the occult and the paranormal in society, gave a lecture. And then very recently, Joe McMoneagle, who's a name, if anybody's familiar with remote viewing, you know his name. He was the #1 viewer for the Stargate program. And he did a great lecture, great presentation about remote viewing, including talking about what it is and why so many of the courses that are out there and people out there really don't know what they're talking about. What's the best way to do it, which is not as complex as other things. But there are a lot of other videos also on the Rhine channel with past lectures and really good stuff that's there, including one by Laura Lynn Jackson, a really well-known medium who's also kind of one of the lead mediums for the Forever Family Foundation on mediumship. So I highly encourage you to check out that channel. All right, let me go to a couple questions here. Lucas, during the last episode, you mentioned that Ed May was unhappy with his interview in Third Eye Spies. Do I have any more details about that? Not off the top of my head. I mean, Ed's told me a bunch of stuff, and I don't really want to get into personality issues that happened. But when it came right down to it, Ed has seen, and others have seen their contribution to the Stargate program minimized by other people connected, including Russell Tark. So Russ did a lot of good work, but sometimes he comes across as when he left the program, that was it. In other words, the program went through his work and that was it. But that's not true. That's at all true. Ed mentioning before a documentary based on ESP Wars. Well, as it happens, we've had ESP Wars, for those of you who don't know, is a book I co-authored with Ed May and Joe McMoneagle and Victor Rubel on the U.S. and Soviet Russian psychic spying programs. And we've had a few documentary producers interested in this. Nothing's come of it until recently. There is a producer who is actually working on a documentary right now. So hopefully we'll have some updates for you in the near future. At some point I'll be hearing from him. I'm told by Ed I'll be hearing about an interview with me at this point. I want to also mention that, speaking of documentaries, I'm about to be interviewed for a documentary on the late, great Martin Caidin, C-A-I-D-I-N. Martin Caidin was a mentor of mine. I worked with him on his ability to do psychokinesis, to move objects. His name might be vaguely familiar to some people who are science fiction fans or fans of the TV show The $6 Million Man or The Bionic Woman. He wrote the book Cyborg, which became The $6 Million Man. He kind of helped in the creation of the Bionic Woman TV show originally. And he wrote over 200 books, half of which were nonfiction on aviation or the space programs, and the other half, space exploration also. The other half were fiction. And his fiction is really kind of fun stuff to read, especially Cyborg. You can get a used copy of that book. It's great to read. It's a great book, especially if you are a fan of Bionics, of the $6 Million Man as well. Okay, from Elliot, Paranormal Phenomenal Research Investigation. Thank you, Elliot, for that comment. I appreciate it. Susanna, do you have any old videos of your guest appearances on sightings or other TV shows? Absolutely. If you go to one of my other YouTube channels, one of them is simply youtube.com/Lloyd Auerbach. That's where you will find clips from a variety of TV shows, including sightings that are there. So many of my guest appearances on different shows, including my appearance on David Letterman way back when, they're on that. I also did the Joan Rivers show, which is there. I haven't uploaded. I've got to upload my appearance on Oprah from the late 80s as well. But there's some fun stuff that's there. And then the other YouTube channel I have, which has a few lectures and even a seminar I did with the late Annette Martin on conducting investigations as a parapsychologist with a psychic. That's just simply youtube.com/Lloyd, Prof Paranormal, PROF Paranormal. That's kind of a sister to the other one. So there are those YouTube channels that are available with various lectures and things like that as well. Have you read the books Irreducible Mind, Beyond Physicalism and Consciousness Unbound? I actually have the first two, um, and I haven't read Consciousness Unbound. I did read them. They're exceptional works. They're very, very dense. I would say that you have to have a really real interest in consciousness and post-materialist ideas of consciousness and psychic phenomena and parapsychology to really delve into those, because they're very big books and very dense as well, but highly recommended. Michio Kaku was asked if he believes in afterlife. He said yes, if we can unload our minds. What are your thoughts on mind uploading and transhumanism? I'm not a fan of transhumanism if we're talking about adding any sort of technology to our brains. Now, I have no problem with the body, no problem with bionics in general. In fact, I think we should be getting there at some point to the same, maybe perhaps not nuclear powered arms and legs like Steve Austin had on the $6 Million Man, but we should be able to get prosthetics that respond to our nerve endings and robotic things like that. I'm not a big fan of adding anything to your brain. I have a problem because I'm a Star Trek fan, and I don't want to see our species turning into the Borg. And I see a basic problem with that, and also mind control. In fact, there was a movie back in the 1960s that probably none of you know, called The President's Analyst. And Woody Allen was in it, and there were a number of other folks in there. And the bad guys, not to give you any, really, I'm going to spoil it anyway for you, but part of this revolved around putting a device in people's heads so you could make phone calls from one person to another. Instead of telepathically, you could actually do it in your head. And then there was a mind control component to that. And that's where we have a problem. So, yeah, I have some problem with that kind of thing. Yeah, it'd be great to have the ability to do that. But then the other question is, uploading your mind to a device is like creating a clone. It doesn't, if consciousness is just the brain, that's fine. But if consciousness is more than the brain, which is what most of us looking at the survival evidence believe, you can't upload yourself, your consciousness. You can upload a copy of it. So for the world, that's great to have that information available, but that's like creating a clone. That clone is not you. So that's not the thing that is you. So I have a problem with that as well. It won't be immortality the way we think of it necessarily. Let's see. Sightings in the 90s. Thank you, Paul. The Letterman thing was so weird. If anybody's curious, I can give a little backstory on that at some point too. You have to put that in the chat. I'm happy to give the backstory on that one. You think AI, Paul, AI is getting better. You doubt ever will achieve human level consciousness. Processing wise, it may get close to it, but the element that makes us human, the elements that make us human, including intuition, feeling things, and even ESP, those are things that are not going to be unlikely, unless we understand how ESP works from a physics perspective. That's unlikely to be achieved by AI. What about adding things to the brain, which are apparently close to having the brain see? No, those kinds of things, I think, to establish the ability to see, and for people to walk. Actually, for people to walk is not necessarily so much adding it to the brain as to kind of adding it to the rest of the body. As long as there is really tight control that there's nothing extra added, and there's no ability for outside folks to hack those devices. I'm fine with that. But hackers can get into cars that use computers. So I have my main concern is that if those devices are not built that are encapsulated, if you don't want a Wi-Fi, you don't want any ability of anyone outside to get into them, they could create serious problems for things. So that's you know my concern personally. Um, Component of the whole cryogenics thing. Cryogenics is still a thing, but they still haven't figured out how to revive human tissue properly. Mainly because when you freeze human cells, or most cells, mammalian cells for the most part, um, they can rupture. So that's a problem. Graveyard Garage. Thank you. Yeah, I'm not telling you my telepathic number is blocked. I have a robocall blocker on that. What are my thoughts about near-death experiences? We should get Paul involved in this discussion. So near-death experiences, there are people who there's a percentage of people who are near death. Their heart stops, or there's some lower brain activity, who do have the kind of classic near-death experiences, which have a range to them. There's like 15 constituent elements for a full NDE, and if you have many of them, you technically have a near-death experience. So this includes the tunnel and the light, but sometimes it's a bridge and a sunny day and a garden. I mean, there's different aspects of this in different parts of the world. But the key for us in parapsychology, because some of the so-called near-death experiences have explanations to them. They're not the full-blown NDEs. Not all NDEs include out-of-body experiences, but many do. Not all NDEs include the same kind of quality of knowingness when you go to the other side, so to speak, of seeing or connecting with people from your past, from relatives, with other things. In other words, not all NDEs come through with the same constituent elements to them. So we have to look at the ones that actually do fit psychic phenomena and seem to indicate that consciousness separates from the body to some extent, if not completely. Those are important here. So it's really important to kind of look at that. But NDEs, there's some such excellent NDEs on record that have no other explanation, no matter what the skeptics say, because they're looking generally at certain types of NDEs. They're not looking at the classic ones, the best ones. That they defy the explanations that materialists are coming up with, the brain-centered explanations. And those are really important to our field, and those support the concept of consciousness being more than brain or even separable from the brain. So those are all important. Let's see. Is it possible to have more than one NDE? Yes. I believe that Joe McMoneagle had 3 in his life. If I recall, I know he's had 2. Believe he's had 3 through his life. So I hate to say this, but if we don't want people to have a lot of NDEs, because that means that their bodies are close to death. But people have had multiple NDEs throughout their lives, and sometimes they're changed, and changing more than once in certain ways. Paul, you're also signed up with the International Association of Near-Death Studies for 30 years. Yeah, that's a great organization. So IANDS, IANDS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. If you're interested in near-death experience, that is a really great organization to join, to go to, without question. And then there are books that Paul's mentioning here, After by Bruce Grayson, who is he is the University of Virginia's leading expert. He's part of the Division of Perceptual Studies. He's been studying NDEs for decades. He is a good person to check out, and that book is really amazing. And then there's the Sam Parnia book, Lucid Dying. But there are other books as well by a number of folks, including Ken Ring, who was one of the people who popularized it. There are books by surgeons, There is, there's several books by PMH Atwater summarizing all the best evidence over time. One called The Big Book of Near-Death Experiences, all valid, all worth reading. So there's quite a bit of literature on this subject that you can get into. Highly recommended for that. It's a good subject. And what's interesting is some of the better cases just simply can blow people away, especially when you have no or lower, significantly lower brain activity. There's just no good explanation. Plenty of explanations, but not good ones outside of what we're talking about. Question about ladies going to space. They all return with a spiritual experience. Yeah. Edgar Mitchell talked about this when he went up in Apollo 14. Gordon Cooper, other of the Apollo astronauts, and even some of the astronauts who just went into orbit talked about, Alan Shepard, others have talked about this over the years, that this, when you hear that they talk about having a spiritual experience, they may not be talking about the kind of spiritual experience we have on Earth, but looking at the Earth from space puts the universe in context for many people. That's one of the things Mitchell talked about, how small, the Earth is in comparison to the rest of space. And that can be considered definitely a metaphysical, philosophical, spiritual experience for people. And definitely something that is, I can completely understand how they can be talking about this as a spiritual experience in general. It's just something that people who go up there have, looking at how small the Earth actually is, have experienced. The book, The Self Doesn't Die, that's a really good book. The Self Doesn't Die just came out in a new edition with additional best cases of near-death experiences. That's a really good book, actually. Do you understand that Russia, yeah, sure, they may be still using remote viewing. We don't have any good information anymore because, from what I understand from Ed May, his Russian counterparts, because of Putin, he really can't talk to us. They can't really talk to us. So, but we're assuming, remote viewing's been used in the Soviet Union and then in Russia by a number of people for law enforcement, finding lost people, the same way it is here. And that, I'm sure, continues. Whether or not they're using for spying is hard to say. So, definitely read our book, ESP Wars. We'll see at least what things were. So, do you think there will be mainstream practical applications of psi? Well, there are mainstream practical applications of psi. The question is whether or not they'll be popularized in the mainstream. And as long as there are the pseudo-skeptics, materialists, and also, unfortunately, people on the fundamentalist religious side, we have a societal issue with that sort of thing. But there are certainly individuals who are have not hidden the fact that they've used psychics in archaeology, in business over the years, people consulting psychics and others. There are people in various industries, various fields that have been fine talking about you working with psychics in that sense. Bro, good to see you here. Let's see what else we have. Is there proper testing to remote viewers outside of military training? Well, there has been, the thing is that going back to the beginning of what was called remote viewing, first of all, remote viewing is basically real-time or precognitive, it's real-time ESP, generally, over a distance. So it's, instead of doing a reading trying to say, what's in this envelope in front of me, which is technically clairvoyance, that envelope would be far away. What's in the envelope far away? What's the location? So remote viewing's been used since, for hundreds, if not thousands, actually for thousands of years in many respects. When the program got started back in 1972, Targ and Puthoff were also doing research that was being published to the general public. They didn't admit, nor did Ed May or anybody else down the road, that they were doing stuff for the government per se, but they were publishing articles and books even. There's a book called Mind Reach by Tarkin Putoff about the remote viewing experiments they did that were publicly open. So when I got to grad school in 1979, I knew about remote viewing already. I had no idea the government was doing it, but there were people like Pat Price, who was a former police commissioner, who was one of the subjects, the participants in the early program, Grill Flame, which was the early program. But he also was they were doing experiments published and popularized to the general public, scientifically, so that colleagues could replicate them. And what was not known was that the government was funding projects. And what was not known was what were some of the remote viewers, including Pat Price and then eventually John McMonagle and others, what were they doing for the government? What were the missions, so to speak, the taskings that they were actually doing? Those were all classified. So it's been something for quite some time. So there is a proper testing protocol. It really is pretty simple. Actually, Joe McMonagle's lecture for the Rhine at 90, which again you'll find on the Rhine Research Center's YouTube channel, talks about remote viewing basically, and it's pretty simple. The key is for the testing protocol that the experimenter who's on site with the remote viewer, and sometimes it's the early remote viewer, when people start doing remote viewing, they often need a handler, somebody who is asking them questions after the initial viewing that they do, just to get them to focus on different things. But that person and the experimenter on site should not know the target. But certainly they shouldn't know any more than what the remote viewer is told. And then if they're doing precognitive remote viewing, you don't want to choose the target until after the viewing is done. So that's basically the protocol. And then you would have a judge. In some of the studies, you'd have a judge try to match the description of the location to one of 4 or 5 other locations, one of 4 or 5 locations, including the actual target. For practical application, you don't need to do that kind of judging. For research, you do need to do that judging. So it's not that complicated, actually. It's one of the simpler experiments people can do. And the reality is that for remote viewing, it's really all about, and with any psychic ability, and you know this, Kathy, getting out of your own way. One of the problems with ESP is that we have normal senses. And our normal senses are pretty potent. And they feed our perceptions. So when we get extra perceptions, mainly our normal senses take over or are there. And we get information, if it has nothing to do with what our normal senses is picking up, most people just ignore it or write it off or think they're imagining it. So we have to get out of our own way to be more psychic. We have to notice we already are and notice what's not perceptual and what's not stream of consciousness thought, just kind of that kind of thing. And that's really the hard part for remote viewing. But otherwise, it's not that hard for people to do. And then it's practice. One of the things that Joe says is that he practices several times a week. He practices remote viewing. That's not even somebody giving him a test, but he practices that because it just keeps that skill honed for him. What is my most fascinating case? I have several fascinating cases. I can tell you the one where the most activity happened. That might be one of the most fascinating cases. And that was a case, a bar restaurant here in the Bay Area. I've talked about this before, called the Banta Inn. It's written up in my book, A Paranormal Casebook, and did the work in the late 80s into the 90s. It's in Tracy, California, and not as active these days, but the apparition or ghost was the bartender owner, Tony Gukin, who died in 1968. And then started first appearing. He appeared to various people, including patrons of the restaurant, who had no idea who he was, but would see him and remark about this guy sitting in the corner, looking up at them, kind of waving at them, but playing two-handed poker with himself. And eventually, one of the owners back in the 70s got a mug book together of people of the right age, including Tony Guckin, and these witnesses always picked out Tony. In the mid to late 1970s, physical things started happening that matched some of Tony's quirks when he was a bartender behind the bar. And when I first was there in the late 80s, I did a shoot for Hard Copy. That was the first time I visited there. It was probably 11 in the morning, so it was before they opened. And the only people in the place were the person doing the cooking in the kitchen. Um, and as I recall, he was out back at the time, the owner and the bartender. And the wait staff hadn't even arrived yet. And they were at the end of the bar away from us. I was facing the bar, the producer, director, one guy, and the cameraman are facing me with their backs to the bar. And as I'm talking, an ashtray pops up off the bar in full view of me, and the owner and the bartender flips over. It was a glass ashtray and smacks down on the bar hard, doesn't break, which was unusual in itself. And of course, the TV guys were very upset they missed it. Camera was pointed the wrong way, and they didn't even see it. Glass of orange juice, actually, as we're discussing things, slides across the bar on its own, like in an Abbott and Costello movie. And that's when I knew that this was going to be a fun place to be. And over time, I saw many physical things happening. We had some really kind of fun things we tested out. It was a really important case for me in many respects because there was so much physicality. In fact, one of the things I learned over time working with television people is a lot of TV people who are not on camera witness phenomena. But because they are the crew, they don't want to be on camera. And sometimes they're not allowed to be on camera. This culminates sometimes. One of the times that I was at the Banta Inn, I'm sitting at dinner with the cameraman, director, and the director's fiance, and a salt shaker on our table. This is all, by the way, before my interview. The salt shaker on the table moves across the table by itself. And the director and his fiance and the cameraman look down at it, and they see it, and they look at me, and I said, "Yeah, it's Tony." Then I said to the director, any of you going to be on camera? Can we interview? You just saw something physical. Are you willing to go on camera? Is your fiance? No, I cannot go on camera. I'm the director. I'm not allowed to go on camera. I can't go on camera. Sometimes it's someone else. Oh, I'm a journalist. I can't go on camera. It's ridiculous. Consequently, years later, I did a TV pilot with a big production company, which unfortunately has never seen the light of day. For one of the networks, and they decided it was too expensive for them to go forward. But there was phenomena. When I set this up with the production company, they had every single member of that crew, cameramen, sound guys, production assistants, even the people in the production area, sign a release form. And they were interviewed on camera when they saw stuff. It's a shame that it never saw the light of day. But they understood that they might be the best witnesses at that point. So anyway, that was one of my best cases, the Banta Inn. Seen the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats. Yeah, it was fun. It's a fun movie, not accurate, but it's fun. And yes, Guy Savelli was not really portrayed in that movie, which is too bad. One has to be grounded as a clairvoyant before they can No, one does not have to be grounded as a clairvoyant before they can be successful as a remote viewer. Anybody can potentially learn to do it if they have the aptitude for that form of ESP. One of the things that we've learned over the years is that people have, like artists, like people who are creative, have an aptitude to learn a skill, a creative skill. So somebody might learn to paint well in portraits and things like that. Someone else can't do it to save their lives, but they can sculpt. Or there's somebody who can learn stringed instruments, but not percussion instruments. We have aptitudes for different things. It's the same with psychic abilities. All mediums are psychic because mediumship is a psychic ability, but not all psychics can do mediumship. It is an aptitude that people have. Remote viewing is just a skill. It's just an aptitude for noticing ESP and focusing, and how good you get, that's where your personal aptitude will hit. You might hit it once in a while, but there's a video on YouTube, and in fact, I'll find it right now and see if we can put the link in there as well. There's a video which was taken from a TV show called In Search of the Dead. It was a BBC show, and it is a successful remote viewing experiment on TV. That's actually the title of it. And I'm going to get you the link right now. It's a really amazing video because my colleague Keith Harari actually trained in 20 minutes a BBC production assistant to do remote viewing. And she did it. In fact, I think you're going to be kind of blown away by how good she did. All right, so Melody, I think we also battle what other people tell us regarding our extrasensory experiences. Absolutely. There are a lot of psychics who have written books on psychic development, and they give you how they develop psychic ability, which doesn't help. Especially doesn't help if the psychic says have a traumatic experience. That's how they got psychic. Or have a near-death experience. That's how they got psychic. So, a little difficult. And Susanna's adding to my band to end story. So one of the things Tony did when he was alive, there was an old cash register which they kept, and there over the years until things have tightened up over the years. But having been a bartender myself during college and grad school days, sometimes you'd keep in the older registers, you keep the drawer open, especially if you're busy, and that way you can easily make change and do all that sort of thing. So Tony would actually keep his hand in the till, and he would line up the coins. He'd stack the coins nice and neat. Throw in new coins, have to stack them again. And we did experiments where open the drawer, I messed up the coins, closed the drawer, waited a minute, opened the drawer again. The coins are all stacked nice and neat. So that was pretty common. After he passed, Tony followed one of the workers home. There were stories about Tony doing that. Usually he would follow the bartender or owner home to make sure that they were okay. And in fact, in one instance, I remember the bartender talking about, she was trying to close up at night and having a hard time getting somebody who's drunk out of the place. She finally gets him out of the bar. She closes the door, not exactly time to close up yet. But she hears a click behind her and turns around, and the door had been locked and the deadbolt had been thrown. And the guy was still standing outside the door at that time. So Tony apparently made sure that everybody was safe at that point. Anything ever truly frighten you? You see the thing fly off the altar in my splintered spirits? Yeah, that was pretty incredible, Kathy. But nothing but living people have frightened me. No. I can't say anything paranormal has frightened me at all. I have felt bad vibes, and really bad vibes in some places that were haunted, where there was this original imprint and it felt really bad. In fact, one instance I felt nauseous, had to get away from there, but I didn't get frightened by that. Fear was not something that came up. A couple of cases with living people and guns. Yeah, that was a different story. So have you seen the telepathy tapes? I have listened to a little bit of them, but I have not really gone through them. Just way too busy to do that. I know Diane Hennessy Powell's research. I also know that telepathy tapes don't exactly get what she did right based on her own presentations and what she's said. Lloyd says you can't be afraid of something if you're trying to analyze it. That actually is true, but I also just know deep inside that the paranormal can't hurt me. I know that. I feel more power, when it comes right down to it, I feel like I have more defenses than a dead guy might have. Let's put it that way. And the only thing I worry about is if the place itself is safe. I worry sometimes about walking into a place and finding there's black mold there and what that, because health risks. But that's not fear. That's a different story. That's kind of, you know, being practical. Um, Paul, you've spoken to Diane Hensey-Powell on the phone years ago telling about them. Yeah, I mean, she did presentation at the Parapsychological Association. She's part of our Survival Net group as well. Let's see. Lucas, how sincere is your practice of Jediism? Pretty sincere, you know. Usually, you know, when it really comes right down to it, people ask me what I believe in terms of a higher power. I believe in the Force, generated by all living things in the universe. So maybe we tap into something or not. I don't really know if that's the physics of it, but I do believe in that. Yeah. And that's, for those of you who don't know, for a while I was working with a group, somebody in England who had a very successful website called the Church of Jediism, and he was trying to resurrect it. And several things actually prevented that from going forward. But I was working with some of my colleagues, actually. We did courses for the Church of Jediism and, you know, how to be a real Jedi kind of thing from an ESP and a little bit of PK as well. I have a friend who spent some time in a situation in Nevada and some entity would pull her hair and annoy her. Maybe somebody wanted to get her attention. That's possible. Do you know if anybody's seen a residual image of the Titanic? Not that I know of. I know that well, I mean, God, ghost ship sightings. There's a tradition in with sailors going back hundreds of years of ghost ships being sighted. You know, there's the Flying Dutchman. There's many other ghost ships, but I don't know anybody who's seen the Titanic. I guess you'd have to be in the same area where the ship went down. You might see a ghost. In that case, you might see a residual image of the actual iceberg as well. So, and thank you, Day. I kind of like this shirt as well. It's my Universal Monster shirt. I'm kind of a big fan of the old movies. International Association of Near-Death Studies having their annual meeting in Chicago this year. That's great. You know, I hope you're going to make that, Paul. Let's see. Graveyard Grog, you had your ponytail tugged on an arm on an investigation at one point. I was patted on the back and had my arm squeezed on the USS Hornet as reaction to a couple things that were going on. So, you know, I didn't see those as physical touches per se, more kind of a sense of being touched in that sense, just like a visual sense of seeing something paranormal, that kind of thing. So a little bit different. All right, before I forget, I want to just throw this out there. Last time I mentioned there was a kind of a special event that happened hosted by the Pari Center, P-A-R-I, and it was on survival. The title was Survival, Reappraising the Evidence for Life After Death. And it was a 2.5 hour live session with 10 of my colleagues actually doing about a 15-minute presentation. They also had another 11, actually it was 9 of my colleagues doing it that way. They had another 11 or so that had submitted 15-minute videos. It's been stitched together as a 5-hour video. Of course, you can watch it and stop it, with some of the best minds looking at the evidence for life after death, survival of bodily death. And that video is up there. If my producer can put that link in there. It is available on YouTube. And it's apps, there it is. Yeah, we don't need a passcode for that one. Yeah, that's just on YouTube. So ignore the passcode piece that's there. But there's the link to it. It's really very good. You're going to resonate to a number of the particular presentations. Some of them, I felt that in watching the live ones, because I haven't caught up on all the ones that are recorded yet, there were a couple that when I felt were not as good as the others. But the thing that was really discussed quite a bit is how the brain, looking at consciousness from a perspective that the brain is not producing consciousness. In other words, the brain is not productive. but the brain is permissive, allowing consciousness to flow through. I think the truth might lie somewhere in between there. But really interesting stuff on the evidence for life after death, how things are considered by researchers, presenting some of the best evidence, considerations about consciousness. I mean, all of that is worth it, and some of the best people. So if you're interested in all in life after death, absolutely watch that. Bookmark it. Take a look at it. All right. I also got an email from a colleague in Scotland, and he had a couple things he wanted me to just mention today. I did respond to him, and I'll get back to your comments, Susanna, in a moment. And one comment was just asking me what I thought of the Global Consciousness Project. And for those who have never heard of that, you can Google Global Consciousness Project. You'll get right to the right site. That was a project started in the 1990s with the PEAR Lab, the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory, run by Robert John back then. That lab closed after John retired, and he's since passed away. But Roger Nelson, who was involved in that lab, is still around. And he started this project where they set up 50 random number generators around the world they kind of kiddingly called them electrogaiagraphs, Gaia being the Earth. Instead of an EEG, they're a random event generator in different parts of the world, taking the measure of people's consciousness. And the idea being that they would look predictively at major events that had emotional impact on the world. They started out, one of the things we knew, and we still know, have a major emotional impact on the world, on people, are certain sporting events. The World Soccer, the Stanley Cup, the Super Bowl, the Rose Bowl. These are things you can predict. You know when they're going to happen. You know there's going to be an emotional reaction to them. And what you do is you look at the data at the time that event is happening, throughout that event, and see if it's gotten non-random. What they found, and continue to find, is that for certain events, the systems get non-random up to 24 hours before an event. So one of the early ones, and then they'll also look at events that happen, you have to look at them after the fact, but they look at events that happen that cause an outcry. So one of the things that happened back in the 90s was the death of Princess Diana. That caused a huge spike before she died. There have been several other similar events. 9/11, same thing. So the data is all available. This is one of the most important things, is that they've made this open data that anyone can analyze. And it's really interesting as to what's going on with that. So it continues to produce data. Take a look at it. So switching topics here to another thing he mentioned, he was wondering if anybody, if I was ever thinking about asking a cooperative spirit to give me an endorsement I can use for branding purposes via EVP, like have an EVP of Professor Paranormal by asking for it. I don't know that anybody's tried doing that, but I guess we need the spirit of a dead marketing exec or an advertising guy to cooperate with us for that. But then there's always the possibility that it's my unconscious that's causing that to happen. All right. Let's see here. All right. So yes, Lint is moving their factory from the U.S. to Canada. It's going to be the case that various companies that have European companies or other companies that have presence in the U.S., because of what's going on, they're going to move out of the U.S. Or they're going to produce only for the U.S. The one factory will not be shipping anywhere else. In case of Lint, from my understanding, the reason they're moving it is because Canada's a big market for them, and possibly even a bigger market than the U.S. So because of the tariffs, they're going to move the factory out of the U.S. That way they can create chocolate for Canada. The U.S. will be, the Lint chocolate would just simply be more expensive in the U.S. than it ever has been, unless the tariffs change for that. That is a problem. There are plenty of U.S. producers of chocolate, of really good chocolate. So we're fortunate in that respect. But prices there may go up because of various tariffs on the cacao beans that are being sent into the U.S. for the production. What is in your opinion, is the best mass-produced commercial chocolate? Um, I'd say a couple of companies are very, very good. Uh, if we're talking U.S. produced, honestly, I believe Guittard, Guittard, Guittard chocolate. They don't do consumer bars anymore, but you can buy Guittard chocolate chips in most supermarkets. They're superior to just about everything. They're now sixth or seventh generation family that's been producing chocolate since the 1850s, 1860s. And they're located south of San Francisco. Ghirardelli, which is another good mass producer, is actually owned by Lindt Sprungli. So I'm not sure what's going to happen there, but they do have a factory here in the States. So that will continue to produce chocolate. And that's another really good producer of chocolate. Two that I think of from overseas, Michel Cluzel and Valrhona. And you can find some Valrhona bar. There's typically a couple of Valrhona bars in Trader Joe's, for example. So Valrhona is considered one of the better chocolate makers in the world. So is Michel Cluzel. But those are just two mass producers that I know of that are there. Also, Scharfenberger, which is an American company. It's owned by Hershey, but they are on their own. They don't follow Hershey's formulas at all. Their factory is now in Illinois. It used to be in Berkeley, California. Scharfenberger is a great producer of chocolate too, and you can definitely find their stuff. They are a big production company. Not as big as some of the others, but they definitely are good. Okay, Anthony Peake. I have several books by Anthony Peake, including his new near NDE book. All very good. He is incredibly knowledgeable about survival of bodily death and the evidence. Definitely pick up his books for sure. I don't know if Godiva has a factory in the U.S. Frankly, I have kind of ignored Godiva. I'm not a fan of Godiva chocolate. They spend more money on their packaging and marketing than they spent on the chocolate. That's my problem with them. I personally prefer artisan chocolates. The two places that I'm buying chocolate from, one specific producer, but one of them is, this has a lot of, I'm going to put this in here, if you go to barandcocoa.com, you are going to be overwhelmed by the number of really good chocolate producers from around the world. They only bring in chocolates from companies that are sustainable, that pay the farmers well over a living wage. Many of the producers pay more than fair trade. They have a lot of great chocolates. And I have a few favorites in there, but I have discovered another company that is actually in the US. They bring in their beans, a particular type of bean from Peru, and that is Fortunato Chocolate.com. In fact, I've got two of their bars right here. I haven't opened one of these downstairs, and I have an open one of the other. So I have their mocha bar, which if you like coffee and chocolate, this is the best one I've ever had. It not only has coffee in the chocolate, but it also has espresso beans on the chocolate. And then this is their 68% dark chocolate, which is so far from bitter. It's really delicious. And they produce milk chocolate. I haven't tried their milk chocolate yet, but I'm going to be getting some. And they have some flavors. I highly recommend them. Their milk chocolate looks like it's about 47%, which is good, which is better, more chocolate in it. But I really recommend them, Fortunato, just because it's so damn good at this point. All right. Trying to think if there was anything else here. Did I miss anything? Have you done any investigating in Minnesota? Not any investigating. I've been to Minneapolis, but when I was there, it was to do a workshop with a friend of mine who was living there at the time, and we didn't do any investigations at that point. I don't know, there's like 3,000 teams on the web in the US, maybe more than that now. One of my students did a assessment a number of years ago and came up with 3,000 active websites of ghost hunting groups in the US alone. And usually those groups split. So there's probably a lot more. I don't know specifically of anybody in Minnesota. So I couldn't say credible or non-credible there for that. So, all I can say is that if there are groups there and they want to contact me and get vetted, I have a process for that. So can do that. What was the one you had in Seaside? I'm trying to remember what I probably brought. A mono chocolate. I'm trying to thought. I might have brought some Manoa chocolate. That's another really, really good company. Manoa chocolate is in Hawaii, and let's see here. They have great chocolate as well. It's much lighter in style, so even their 70% cacao doesn't taste as dark as other chocolates because of the beans that they're getting in Hawaii that are growing. Hawaii's growing quite a bit more now. Tropical theme on the bar. Yeah, that would have been then Manoa if that's the one I brought. Yeah, I'm on their. I get their chocolate of the month. They have great flavors, great tropical flavors, really unusual flavors from time to time. I have a dark milk pistachio vanilla bar that I got from them that's really good. Another one that I've got right here is, this one actually came a couple months ago. It's their bar that's got caramel in it. It's got caramel flavoring, basically caramel in it, and cacao nibs. Also really good. But their Hawaiian chocolate bars are excellent. Okay, so we're just about down to the wire right now. Trying to make sure I haven't missed anything on my list to talk about. What do I hand out? Okay, so that's a really good question. I go to the supermarket and I buy, first let me back up. I'm at the bottom of a hill, a steep hill in a cul-de-sac. We actually got, I think, 4, maybe 5 trick-or-treaters this year. That's 5 more than we've got in the last few years. There's more kids in the area here. So I don't have to buy a lot of candy for Halloween. And at a certain point, we go to a friend's place who has a party every year for Halloween in a neighborhood that has sets up homes like haunted houses. So we get to go to those. So we're really not home all that much. So what I do is I go to the supermarket and get these little bags of squares of Ghirardelli chocolate because they're not cheap, but I know I'm not going to be giving out a lot. And what's really interesting to see what happens when you give them to these kids, and you can get milk chocolate or dark chocolate, or even ones with filling like caramel filling, which I tend to do. And when I give them to the kids and the parents see what I'm giving the kids, their eyes widen. I had one father say to me, thank you so much. And to his daughter, you're getting the good stuff. And one of the other parents said, thanks for not giving them candy. So recognizing that this was good chocolate and wasn't candy per se. If you don't get a lot of trick-or-treaters, treat them. Treat the kids that do come. That's all I can tell you. Yeah. If we had a lot of trick-or-treaters, I might kind of break down and give them Milky Way bars or something, the little Milky Way bars and stuff like that. But I still would prefer to do that. And actually what I prefer to do is to give pieces of chocolate that I make, because I do make chocolate from time to time. So anyway, let's see. Liz, yeah, you got to show up earlier. Back in 2 weeks, May 11th, 8:30 Eastern, 5:30 Pacific. You can watch the episodes, of course, live under the live tab. And now we're just about out of time. Just as a reminder, go to the Rhine Education Center's website, which is rhineedu.org. You can find the link on the info on the channel, and take a look at the classes that are starting on Thursday and next week. I hope to see everybody again in 2 weeks. And Liz, no side games here tonight. All right. We'll try to figure something out next time. Just come earlier. We can talk about that. Take care, everybody. Good night.